Art Administrator and Grant Director for the Mississippi Arts Commission. She is an author of nonfiction and poetry. Diane has been sewing for 58 years. She's a professional storyteller for 31 years. She is a mixed media fiber artist for 12 years. Diane is a fellow member of the Craftsman Guild of Mississippi. Diane's fiber arts have been exhibited in museums, art galleries, festival events, on covers of literary journals, and a few of her pieces reside in museum collections. One of her traditional quilts, the Walking Path, is housed in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History as part of their quilt collection. If you were to ask Diane to describe her work, she would say, "I see the world as a landscape that can be created in dimensional and territorial layers of fabrics. My work is not thematic, it is evolution. It starts with the traditional, then follows its own whimsical chanting into a narrative world all its own, and I follow along the walking path." So here is Miss Diane Williams to come talk to you.
She's going to help me with my PowerPoint presentation. The first set of images that you're going to see do not belong to me. So let me clarify that. Some of you may already recognize this first image, but I'll be telling you about that in a minute. And then I'm going to show you some of my work, and then we can kind of have a conversation about that. But let me tell you, I'm here because I was asked to come here. Thank y'all. I feel a little sassy on this stage. You know, when you get an invitation, that's all right. And I've sat with some wonderful people. Oh my goodness. If you looked over where we were sitting, we've been laughing and what we call cracking up. We've been having a good time. So on behalf of the Mississippi Humanities Council, that's why I'm here today. It don't cost you all a nickel. So you want me to come somewhere, y'all gotta pay me. But the Humanities Council is sponsoring this today so that monies could go to other things that you all are doing. And because I'm here for the Humanities Council, I have to do a Humanities Council presentation. So I'll do that first. And the presentation is called the Historic Journey of the African American Quilter. But I know there's something going on in your mind. Who is this girl on this stage? What's she all about? She talking like she a Southerner and she from New Jersey. Who she think she is? But I know a lot of times in the South, people say, "Who your people?" And they look at you like this. Until they find out who your people are. Everybody in here done asked me where I live. I say, I live in Jackson. That ain't good enough for you. I got to tell you, I live in Northeast Jackson by North Park Mall. But I started sewing 58 years ago. I was 12 years old. Now, you know how old I am? I'm not ashamed. I'm in my second set of teenage years. My daddy, my foster daddy, who was actually my step-great-grandfather, took me down to Mr. Lambert's tailor shop. And I learned how to sew meticulously. Mr. Lambert set me at his knee, told me you got to iron those, when you sew a piece together, you got to iron those seams open. And he taught me everything I knew about sewing. I grew up in the civil rights era. You know, we went from pre-civil rights to civil rights. Ooh, when I started sewing, I started making my daddy African dashikis. I thought he was gonna go out there and raise his hand and say, "Black power." No, my daddy was Black power. He didn't have to prove anything to anybody, but I would sew little clothes and things for him. And when I became a young adult woman, I started my own little business, Diane So and So. And I stopped because I'm a perfectionist. You're not gonna see that in my work. I said I've been sewing for 58 years. I'm tired of being a perfectionist. Dorinda Evans, who's one of the teachers for tomorrow, taught me how to do things right. And I walked out of her class and did what I wanted. Little did I know she would come to my first exhibition. And she was looking at the corners of everything. Come here, Diane. And I said, I know. Anyway, I've only been a fiber artist. Well, I've quilted, part of my lifetime. But I was discovered by the person who's the director of the 2 museums in downtown Jackson, Pam Jr. I used to go to, when she was at the Smith Robertson, I would go over there and I would show her little applique things I had done about this size. She said, how many of them can you do? That's nice. I said, I don't know. She said, you're gonna be our next exhibition. You were there, Dorinda. I couldn't believe it. The place was jam-packed with people. I could not believe what God was doing in my life. I just couldn't believe it. So she discovered me, and I'll never forget that. I waited 25 years to apply to be a member of the Mississippi Craftsman's Guild. Yeah, I guess I got in that first time. I'm a fellow now, which means you have to apply 4 times every 3 years before you become a fellow, and you're considered a master artist. But I still break all the rules. But the main thing is you have to put rigor into your work. I work with a little tiny number 10 applique needle, and I can sew as fast as you do on your sewing machine. Wow. I line up my needles. Dorinda taught me something. She said something about the needle. The eye of the needle has this little bit of a curve in it. It's a myth, Dorinda, it's a myth. And you stick that thread through. But Dorinda, I've been threading needles with this glaucoma with no problem ever since you taught me that. So now y'all know a little bit about me. I'm an author. I've written a bunch of books and stuff like that. Go look them up. Get Mississippi Folk and the Tales They Tell, Hotels, Folklore, Myths, and Ball Face Live.
It's a good book. It's a really good book.
Thank you. And the life and legacy of B.B. King, too. I wrote that one, too. I like writing about history and biographies. But what I want to talk to you about, I want you to just go with me on the journey, because I was asked to talk about trends. But we got to go back. This is Harriet Power's work right here. This primitive work, this primitive applique. She was born in 1837. She was a black woman born into slavery. She died in 1910. You recognize how that applique could be done, how those squares could be put together. Y'all know about stuff like that. But this was a slave woman that did this. And the important piece of information about what she's done is that 2 of her quilts are in the Smithsonian. That's what's important. As you talk about traditional quilts, one of the things you all talk about, you name those things, you know those names, and those names of those quilts are very, very important. I'm not as good as you all, but my walkabout is in the Mississippi Department of Archives and History in their collection, because I know how to talk about it. I know the name of that quilt. Very important. Could you help me with your next image? Now, this one is, I think they may have gotten out of order, but this is, I believe, Carolyn Maslumi, I know that is. And so we went from utilitarian quilts, and we're still doing utilitarian quilts and giving our grandchildren and all of them quilts that they don't want to cover up because we're in the South. But Carolyn Maslumi has worked with African-American quilters around the country to exhibit their work. And now this piece that she's done is part of our civil rights era. You see people walking and marching. You see people standing around and pointing to things. This is where today African-Americans, some of them are going with the designs that they're creating, but there is something that has to happen to make that a conversation, to make that narrative important, and it's choices. It's the choice of color, it's the choice of fabric, and this is what I have learned, and I'm gonna tell you who I learned it from in just a moment. This is another one of Carolyn Maslumi's designs. That's Billie Holiday. We recognize that is her by the flower in her hair. Look at the color choices that Carolyn has made. You don't think about Billie Holiday being a drug addict. All you see is the singer, right? This wonderful, wonderful person, head back, and they're singing. This piece is, anybody recognize this piece? This quilt, I don't know what you think of it, but it sold for $461,000. This was created by Faith Ringgold. She's an activist, she's a visual artist, a quilter, and the piece was sold to Oprah Winfrey, who purchased it for Maya Angelou. In case you read it, $461,000. Faith Ringgold is still alive today. She was born in 1930, and she's still doing her thing. I like to do jigsaw puzzles, and don't you know, at one time, I couldn't find this, it's gone now, but at one time she had a jigsaw puzzle that you could download the app, and it was Quilt You All. It was so wonderful. Okay, next one. That's another one of Faith Ringgold. This is on the cover of her book, Tar Beach, with she tells a story about children on the rooftop and imagining that they could fly all over town. Next slide. This is another one. There the children are flying. That's on Tar Beach is the name of the book. Wonderful story. I'm from New Jersey. We used to go up on the rooftops to cool off. Next slide. Now here's where my mindset changed from traditional quilting. And I said, you know, did anybody recognize her? Gwen McGee. Y'all know Gwen McGee?
Yes.
Gwen McGee would allow me to sit at her feet and watch her do her work. I said, teach me. She said, I ain't gonna teach you nothing. She said, but you can sit here. And while I would sit at her feet, she said, what do you think about this fabric or that fabric? Gwen made important choices that brought us to the table for conversation. And in the South, in Mississippi, this is something I don't think is easy for us to talk about with me as a black person, what I've gone through, what you as your ancestors have gone through. You know, you descended from some people that during a time it was tough for blacks and whites, right? We have to admit it. We don't want to talk about it. But when Gwen McGee started doing her work, Roland Freeman was the photographer that would photograph her work and make sure that it was archived. And she said, should I start exhibiting? He said, no, not yet. And when he felt it was time for her to exhibit her first exhibition, it was at the Mississippi Museum of Art downtown. All the galleries were filled. You can go to the next slide. All the galleries, that's a close-up of one section of her work. All of that is threading, you all. I'm sorry, there's nowhere, no place, no how you could see the detail in Gwen McGee's work without seeing it in person. But I think as you look here, you get an idea. A lot of times you see images of faces. You know, those men were, you know, working on the chain gang and they were digging. And in those rocks, that's what that represents. Sometimes you can see images of people's faces. You turn her quilts over on the backside, you see faces and things like that. But when she exhibited at the Mississippi Museum of Art, blacks, whites, all kinds of people were in the gallery, and I looked around. They were communicating. They were talking to one another. People started crying. And they understood that during these tough times, go ahead to the next one. During these tough times in our history, they felt empathy. Y'all know about empathy. Not sympathy, not anger, not malice at anybody, but empathy. And when you see a burning cross and people on their knees, can you see it? We can now have a conversation because Gwen McGee made the choices of not so much showing actual fire, but showing colors and silhouettes and things that made you think about what happened and care. Next slide. This would lift every voice and sing. You see blacks, whites, different people. I think that one, I just saw this in person, and I can't remember if it was at the 2 museums, but go ahead to the next slide. She came to my office with these pieces of fabric to make this, and she's telling me all about it. Her mind was incredible. One of the things I learned from Gwen McGee is that you've got to know how to talk about your work. I was a grant administrator for the Arts Commission for 16 years. And I would tell that to artists, you gotta know how to talk about it. They didn't listen to me. I said, you know, there are people listening to you, and they hear you. Gwen McGee received a $50,000 grant. She couldn't apply for it, but the people understood that she understood what she was doing. Your teachers that'll be teaching you tomorrow understand what they're doing. So she came in and she explained what she was gonna do. I couldn't believe it. So that's New Orleans, Louisiana, you know. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Now, this is not a quilt. This is Jacob Lawrence's work. He is famous for the Great Migration. This has informed me as well in the designs and things. And my work is not like any of them. It has to be original. But Jacob Lawrence was able to create these silhouettes that make you think, that make you understand the journey of a people. Next slide. This one to me is the most famous, is people getting on the train, Great Migration. If you sit down with some black folks and you talk about what you see in this image, you know what they're gonna tell you? I remember Mom and them. They would get on that train and go up there and visit somebody in Chicago, and they'd fix a sack lunch. The bag would be greasy, the paper bag would be greasy. And they'd get on that train because they wouldn't feed the black folks on the train. So the people got on that train with their own meals and sat there and had the meals and had a good time. So that's narrative design, right? Next slide. Now, this right here, and I got all these notes, but I'm gonna just talk. So this slide right here is, I couldn't find a really good image. I have a couple of those. Go ahead to the next one and the next one. Okay, right there. So this is where I'm really informed about where I need to go with my work, especially since my vision is not as good as it used to be. I want to do activist art. And the first piece I did, this is not mine or anything, but the first piece that I did, you know, we get into these contests and you get these blue ribbons. They gave me some money, y'all, and let me keep my quilt. So, this is what they call an arpilleras, A-R-P-I-L-L-E-R-A-S. I was storytelling down in Miami, and I was in the library, and they had the three images you saw, the first, second, and this one. They had some of these images hanging on the wall, and I'm like, are these quilts? Really? These are quilts? Who did this? The people didn't know, so I mentioned it on Facebook. I love my Facebook friends because they told me it was an arpilleras. And some people say the arpilleras is women in Chile, some say Peru. But what happened in the early part of the 20th century, like 1970, not that long ago, the women, General Pinochet, he was the president, and he took husbands, sons, fathers away from their families. So the Catholics came in and taught women how to quilt design. So the first two images are people in the village, you know, their lifestyle. And so the women were using their husband's fabrics, their clothes, and making these images of what life was like when they had their husbands with them. And they would slip little notes in between the sections of fabric. It was like a newspaper for them to get that out, to let people know of the wrong the president was doing and how they wanted to find their husbands and sons and fathers. That made a great impression on me, you all, for activist quilting. How do we become an activist? How do we care about what's going on in our society without being mean, without being angry with somebody? Can we quilt it? Can we design it? Yes, we can. Next slide. There's another one that's showing you what was happening in those communities. But the basic arpilleras are very three-dimensional. They pop off the fabric. They're not just applique, they're puffy. They have cotton on the inside to show you, like if it's berries or something growing on a tree, you will see the raised fabric to exhibit that. But these were statements, again, without being angry with anybody. And don't you know that the women in Chile were able to be a part of the system that got General Pinochet out of office? Okay? We as women, there's men up here too, okay. We don't have to fight with anybody, you know what I'm saying? We don't have to be angry with anybody, but we can express our cultures and the things that we deal with in our life. I think that's the last one in that section.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's go to the next one. Now y'all gonna get to see some of my art. They gave me a short time to talk to you all. But this is what has informed me. Now, I'm to talk to you all about the future. What's the future for this thing that we do called quilting or fabric art? It's become art, what, since the 90s or something like that? We're doing art, and I'm loving what I see when I looked at the Render's quilt and saw the different colors and things, and those colors play with your emotions. So one of the things I have been doing as I do my work, I always care about what others are doing and how can I help them. This design, these 12 squares, I was asked by the mayor of Daphne, Alabama, to come down and work with the community and have them, teach them how to quilt a design that represented Daphne, Alabama. So we brought in artists. I was just a facilitator. We brought in artists. I brought in someone that could quilt. I brought in just every segment of the population, just a couple of people that came in and put this together. And it hangs in City Hall in Daphne, Alabama. Somebody put it on the cover of a magazine. Next slide. This one was done down in Stone County. Now, y'all know anything about Stone County?
Yes.
As you're driving down Highway 49, you're gonna see all those rebel flags.
Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College is in.
That's right. Yeah, so you're gonna see a lot of rebel flags. They invited this black woman, Diane Williams, to come down and say, help us tell the story of our community with quilting. And so Mark again was with us. Who else we had? Weekly was his last name, was the guy that quilts. Marcus Weekly, he put it together. But I was the one that had to get the money to make this happen, because I always believe everybody should get paid. So I got the money to pay the artists. So we had artists, we had the mayor, we had the city council folks, economic development, but you need that buy-in. And then they figured out what they wanted, which square they wanted to represent their community, and they put it together. Marcus sewed it together. You see the fabric panel on the side. You can flip through the pages and it'll explain each one of those squares. That's important to me. Those people don't even know my name right now. I'm gone, but they know their story. Next slide. Okay, I can do traditional, that's Drunkard's Path. Next slide. That's the walkabout that I did with my private image next to it. Next slide. We could, okay, the first set of slides are gonna be things that I did that I guess y'all call them traditional. Next slide. Next slide. This piece right here is hanging in Smith Robertson Museum and Cultural Center. And I think they have in their collection about probably 5 designs that I've done. And now the Smith Robertson Museum and Cultural Center is owned by the city of Jackson. So my checks come from Jackson. Don't y'all tell nobody that, because they got water problems. Don't tell nobody they paid me $3,500 to do a freedom quilt. Don't tell nobody, because they got waste management problems. Next slide, I want you to see how big this piece is. So that's in that permanent collection if you go to Smith Robertson Museum. So now we're getting ready to see, I'm not like y'all. The name of this quilt is Akwaba, which means welcome. It means welcome. And the Smith Robertson Museum appreciated that so much that now when you walk into the museum, the big sign says Akawaba. Next slide. That was one of the first ones I did, you know, those little magazines, and y'all know the name of all these people that, in these magazines that do these pieces and different things like that. So I tried my hand at something like that, and the doctor purchased it. Next slide. Now, I wish you could see that close up. It has thousands of tiny little beads in it. And I bead like the African women would put seeds in their mouth when they go to planting, and they walk along the path and they spit the seeds down, they do plant for their gardens. I put a bunch of seeds in my mouth, and then I'm sowing it. So there's hundreds, and that piece is about this tall. Okay. That one, I like, there's clay over there. I mold and play with clay and things like that and put it in my design. Sometimes I put my own hair in my design. Sometimes I paint the fabric. You can go ahead to the next slide. That was a fun piece. That was probably 2.5 by 2.5, really, really small. Yeah, and you see the little, it looks like rough grass down there, reddish. I love work, and you know my work because I love working with, what do they call it, sari yarn, raw silk, hand-dyed yarn. I really love that, and I like for it to get rough and raw. Next slide. I crochet, and then those are dyed cotton leaves all around. And I love working with, what you call it, upholstery, textile fabric. Next slide. Again, dyed fabric. I don't know if y'all can see the image of a man playing the drum and a woman dancing by the moon. Next slide. And my favorite thing, if you got an old guitar or a violin, I would love to have it because I will quilt on anything I can. I will create my designs on anything I can. Next slide. That was on a piece of wood. Next slide. And that one's all about the blues, so it has blues artist names on it. And okay, I think from there you could just click slowly. That's a close-up. Howlin' Wolf, Buddy Guy, Robert Johnson, okay. I call that Google eyes when I'm looking for it. And look at you see the red, the textile fabric, but then I have these little squigglies. I said to myself, I don't want to quilt like everybody else quilt. How do I hold everything together? So I started doing these little tree-like squigglies. Next slide. And that piece, that was a pretty large piece. I don't know why I haven't done more of those. That was a lot of fun to do. I call that the Laughing River. The people on this side of the river are angry because these people over here dancing and singing and drumming. Sounds like my neighborhood of quiet senior citizens. Next slide. And then I started painting on my fabric. Rhonda Blasingame, some of y'all know her. She taught me how to paint on the fabric, and anyway, I wanted to come off the fabric. I wanted to get away from doing just square things, square rectangles, and I started coming off the fabric. Next slide. And so you can see some of my stitches. That's metal, that's a metal roof. There's a little soft metal. Next slide. See the man up there on the roof, on the mountaintop? His hands in the air, looking down at the river, looking up at God, one or the other. Next slide. Okay, you can just kind of keep going through. I make the clay faces. And my friends love it because sometimes this is the hem of their dresses that they had to cut off, you know, things like that. I saw a man's shadow, and I tried to recreate a shadow. I did all the little hand stitches, you all, around there. Okay. That's the gin, you know, they know the magic. There's a leather mask. Her headpiece is dimensional, and her earring, her jewelry. I will repurpose your jewelry. I will take your jewelry, that you want me to put in art and I will sell it back to you. All these pieces, I've made thousands of pieces, you all, and I sell everything. That's why I don't have anything to show you today. Okay, so the next slide is a close-up of that. So you see I have yarn for her hair. And I'm not afraid for you to see my stitches because as a member of the Craftsman's Guild, I couldn't keep getting back in if you see raggedy stitches all the time. Okay. That was in a magazine and I tried to mimic the design. Keep going. Now all of that is just hand done. I draw a little picture with a pencil on the fabric and then stitch. All with my little tiny number 10 applique needle. Keep going. That I did on a canvas because quilts, I want everything to just be flat and stretched, and I'm not satisfied with, my quilt is in a show and it's hanging and it's kind of loose and goosey. So I may stretch my designs over a canvas. That one's owned by Mississippi College, the Gore Art Gallery. I did an exhibition there and they purchased that piece. And that's one of my greeting cards. I started working on hardstock paper and doing greeting cards. I call them unmentionable note cards. And I think it's this next one, you'll really see the little tiny stitches. Oh, that one too. There's a lot of little beads in there. There it is. That's a pretty large piece. That one right there, I had a spider on the front of that. And it didn't sell. That did not make me happy. A couple of years of holding on to it, I said, I'm taking the spider off. The children love the spider. They love to look at the spider. But I decided when I did this design in applique, someone purchased it right away. Okay. That was I made a sweater for my grandbaby and I made it too small. So I made some art out of it. Now we're going to see this clock close up. This was an old clock I repurposed, and so you see how I did all the stitching in there. Okay. That's abstract. That's the most recent piece I've done, and I was contacted maybe a day or two ago by Artistically Human. It's a Facebook page, and they asked, could this be the cover of their Facebook page for this month? And I've been on the cover of literary journals, and people have, organizations have asked for my designs to be on their website. Someone here told me they were down in Port Gibson for Alliston Smith's workshop. I brought her in from Ohio, and she taught a wonderful workshop. Well, this is my version. It's totally different from what she was doing. And then there you see the little cats, you see a guitar, you see a lot of little embellishments that I added to the design. Again, you'll see that raw silk sari yarn all the way around. You can go ahead. This one right here, I entered this in the contest. Again, I wanted to be an activist artist. And one of the judges told me later on, she said they wouldn't allow me to judge this piece because I knew the judge, so they wouldn't allow her to. But what she told me afterwards, she said, I liked it so much I'd like to buy it from you. That is the craziest piece I've ever saw. I made the clay face. Some crafts person at the guild taught a class on how to make those faces, those ugly faces, and then I took all this broken jewelry and stitched it in there, and somebody purchased it. Oh, let's go ahead and pass that one. This one, I gotta tell y'all. Y'all got grandchildren, y'all got children, some of y'all got little children. This little boy, my coworker's little boy, did a Mother's Day card. And I asked the mother if I could turn it into a design. And me and this little boy, Willem, we went on exhibition at the Library Commission and at the Municipal Art Gallery. He was so proud. He was about 8 or 9 years old. And I had turned his design into a fiber art piece. Okay. Painting on fabric, adding elements. Keep going. It's another one of my greeting cards. Self-portrait with those cotton leaves. Keep going. The bottom, all four on the bottom are greeting cards, and you see that piece on the end? Somebody had to buy their jewelry back. Now, this is what I want to tell you. This piece right here, the Mississippi Humanities Council commissioned me to create the awards for that particular year. And so I think the next slide is going to show you how I reproduced those awards. So you see the kinds of things that we could do. The Mississippi Public Broadcasting won an award that year, so they have one of those in their office. And then I had a man burn the wood, that's the top part of the design. I think, well, we have to end now.
I think so.
And the last thing I wanted to tell you all is where can we go with this thing we call fiber art? One of the things that I've done that you may be interested in, I was asked to teach what I do on cruise ships. And so an 8-day cruise to the East Caribbean for me and a friend for free. And they gonna pay me, and all expenses paid, that's fun. And then I was invited to go to South America to teach one day, or 8 day, well, that was a 15-day cruise, but the East Caribbean was an 8-day cruise. I only had to teach one day. All the people that took the class received a free sewing machine. Wow. Think about this, y'all. This is happening all the time. I'm not the only one that could do this. Cruise planners, the person I know at Cruise Planners will book your cruise. You got some friends that want to go and learn your class? Now they have to pay. But you certainly would be able to benefit from just teaching one day. You can almost name where you want to go if you help them get some people to board the boat with you. So I thank y'all. There's so many other things that could be done, but that's all I'm going to share with you for now, and I appreciate your time.